Welcome to our webinar, hosted by Ontario Greenbelt Alliance and Municipal Leaders for Stronger Communities. Today, we are talking with Victor Doyle, Professional Planner, Sarah Hasenack, Conservation Campaign Coordinator with Ontario Nature, and Mark Reusser, Director with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. The Greenbelt is 20 years old, and our goal is to ensure that it remains strong and protected for generations to come. Our first question to panelists is, what gives you hope?
One of the places that does give me some hope is when I see people who actually understand or try and understand the need to protect what is good. And when I say to protect what is good, I refer to farmland and the natural environment, everything that was there before we came. And I think it is so important that we recognize that cities aren't the only thing that is important. The land that feeds us is important too. And people give me hope.
Right. Sarah, what gives you hope in these rather uncertain times?
One of the things that I always go to for hope when I'm feeling less than hopeful would be the natural areas themselves, as Mark spoke to just briefly. I think we're incredibly fortunate here in Ontario, and I think everyone on the call can appreciate this, to have just an abundance of fresh water and beautiful natural areas and the highest quality agricultural land in Canada. Really recognizing the value that those natural ecosystems have, seeing all the ways that they continue to support our communities, including through their support of food and water security locally, is really a big source of hope for me. And then similar vein to what Mark shared as well, seeing and knowing that the vast majority of Ontarians understand and appreciate that as well. And it's not just a handful of people that get it. It's really a widespread understanding.
And Victor, how about you? What gives you hope these days?
Good afternoon, everyone. A few things give me hope. Planners always have to be a glass half full breed. Otherwise, we would have given up a long time ago. But the renewed nationalism, although I'm a globalist, is, I think, a good thing. I think people are going to look more closely at Canada's natural areas, our water resources, our beautiful farmland, and collectively, they're going to take on a greater significance. That's one of my hopes. It gives me hope. Another thing that gives me hope, there was a recent court decision where the group of youth who were challenging Ontario's climate change strategy, they call it a plan, but it isn't really a plan. But in any event, they've been beavering away at this, going through various levels of the courts, and they recently won again, despite Ontario's attempts to derail that court challenge. So here we have young people taking up the torch, using the democratic legal systems we have to hold governments accountable. And that really gives me a lot of hope.
Okay. Let's remember that is over the next short while, we may be getting to some issues and analyses that sap away a bit of that hope. But I'm hoping that by the end of this webinar, most of you will also feel hopeful that we can do something to protect our food and water security. The most fundamental needs we have are for food and water. Trump's tariffs are driving up food prices, and dismantling environmental protections are threatening our water resources. The federal and provincial governments each have a role to play in food and water security. I'm going to ask each of you to maybe identify the top 2 actions that each order of government can take to protect. It can either be food security or water for security in Ontario, or both. So what are the top 2 things that higher orders of government should be doing to protect food and water security? I'll start with Sarah.
Great. Yeah. So I'll start maybe at the provincial level, as Ontario Nature being a provincial organization. The Ontario government does have that significant role to play in protecting those natural areas that are foundational to our food and water security, including through its role in land use planning policies and decision-making processes. Unfortunately, the province has been stepping away from some of these responsibilities. So there's the provincial changes to the Conservation Authorities Act, which came into effect in April 2024, one set of them, which prevented conservation authorities from being able to deny development permits based on potential pollution-related impacts, which increases the risk that we may approve developments that damage our water security, along with other examples like the expanded use of minister's zoning orders to approve developments that don't necessarily comply with minimum provincial protections for natural areas, removal of the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and of course, as you mentioned at the start, the passing of Bill 5. So we're really just seeing that really dangerous trend that is severely undermining the policies and legislation that have long been in place to protect our food and water systems, including those protections for natural ecosystem. All that to say, I really think the first and most basic step that the provincial government can and needs to take is to step away from that trend of weakening provincial protections for those natural ecosystems and prime farmland that we depend on, and the trend of establishing broad discretionary powers to override protections where they exist. And then the second and perhaps more important part of that being to establish a holistic legislative and policy framework that actually effectively protects our valuable farmland and the natural ecosystems that are so critical to resilient food production and clean water locally here in Ontario. So that's a big ask and a big thing to do. But I think a couple of key aspects in such a policy framework would be to, of course, prioritize the protection, stewardship, and restoration of natural ecosystems and their integration in the agricultural landscape. Again, recognizing that foundational role they play in supporting food and water security, and also establishing support systems for farmers here in Ontario to adopt biodiversity-friendly farming practices that support local food production while also reducing some negative impacts on surrounding ecosystems. So, for example, encouraging practices that reduce reliance on excessive and frankly expensive fertilizer and pesticide use that can then pollute our water and harm pollinators and other native insects that are so key to our food production. At the federal level, there's a multitude of pathways, one of which is that Canada has committed to an international biodiversity strategy, including 23 targets with deadlines in 2030, which is shockingly only 5 years away now. The most well-known target, perhaps, is that commitment to protect 30% of lands and waters by 2030, but there are several other equally important targets in there that are directly relevant for food and water security. So, for instance, one target commits to ensuring agricultural and natural resources are managed sustainably, emphasizing resilience and long-term sustainability in these industries, and specifically emphasizing food security. And then there's other relevant targets around reducing pollution, which is particularly relevant for maintaining water quality and security, and then to restore, maintain, and enhance nature's many contributions to people and other species more broadly, including a range of ecosystem functions that directly underpin food and water security, so soil health, pollination, water regulation, all kinds of good stuff. So meaningful action to advance those targets is one way the federal government has a responsibility and opportunity to support food and water security here in Ontario and across Canada. Another point I think is important here and that I'd be remiss not to recognize is that these responsibilities and opportunities within colonial government structures must also be conducted in the spirit of truth and reconciliation with the diverse Indigenous nations of what we now call Ontario and across Canada. Indigenous nations have their own governance systems and processes that have to be respected in line with the inherent treaty and constitutional rights of Indigenous peoples, including rights to hunt, fish, and harvest from the land.
Okay. Big list. The good news is we don't need to reinvent anything new. People know what needs to be done. It's just about creating the political will. I'll hand it over to Mark now. What are your top 2 things that you would like to see the federal government and perhaps the provincial governments do to support food and water security?
If it's okay, Franz, I'm going to focus on the provincial government. I really believe that the provincial government is the CEO of the corporation. They set the culture for the province. They have the power to influence what happens everywhere in this province. They set the framework for planning. And I really believe that good planning is imperative. You can't do things without good planning, and planning all the way down to the municipal level. So things like the PPS and Places to Grow and the Power of Conservation Authorities, those are just 3 examples that have already been mentioned by Sarah. They're the framework for planning in Ontario. And why do I focus on the province in this case? That is because I think it's a provincial issue. So when I look at the province, especially Southwestern Ontario, from a farmer's and agricultural perspective, I see something special. I see this wonderful place wonderful climate, moderated by 3 Great Lakes, wonderful array of soils, able to grow a longer list of fruits, vegetables, grains, and livestock than any other similar sized jurisdiction in North America, with the exception of California, and they have to get their water from somewhere else. It's the Goldilocks zone of North America. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's not too wet, it's not too dry, and it's reliably so. This is a place worth saving. Only 5% of Ontario can actually grow food because that's the only place with soil. We need to ensure that we grow either up instead of out or somewhere else in order to preserve this land, which is unique to this continent. And the province has a huge responsibility in ensuring that happens.
Thank you. Victor, what about you? What do you think are some of the key actions the provincial and federal government should take to secure food and water systems in Ontario?
Well, thanks, Franz. Federally, they're debating a bill as we speak called Bill C2, which is very similar to Ontario's Bill 5, where they get to suspend all environmental rules and laws and requirements for projects they want to pick. And it really removes a lot of our democratic rights. A key action would be to take those parts out of that bill and have a fuller debate and amend them to the more appropriate. Urban sprawl is a major threat to farmland and natural areas in southern Ontario. And the federal government just announced it's going to create a new Build Canada Homes program and support housing with some other big programs. I'd like those to really be focused on driving that housing that we need to our existing communities to reduce the sprawl that accompanies the suburban and exurban development that has caused many issues. At the Ontario level, there's something called the Great Lakes Protection Act. And I happen to work on it along with a lot of other people. It requires a monitoring report every 3 years, and 2025 is the next year. So I think everybody should urge the government to do a thorough, evidence-based job because the Great Lakes connect to all our inland watersheds and water systems. We should all keep an eye on that and try to input if and when we see consultation efforts. And secondly, on the farmland front, with the tariffs, a lot of people are saying we could grow agriculture. It's one of the biggest economic sectors, creation sectors in the province, if not Canada. And I'd like to see the provincial government strike some sort of agricultural task force like they did for housing to, first of all, get a state of the nation and the threats that we've been facing in terms of farmland laws, as well as how we can grow that sector by protecting the land and investing in all sorts of things needed in the whole food production continuum to really capitalize on that wonderful landscape that Mark was telling us about.
Okay, thank you. I hope that people now realize a wonderful to-do list. Next time you speak with your local NPP or your local MP, just heard what you can ask them to do to help secure our local food and water systems. I was struck by a comment you just made, Mark, that describes Southern Ontario as the Goldilocks zone. And I think most of us on this call live with the Goldilocks zone. I've been part of something called the Ontario Greenbelt Alliance for many years, and we're all about protecting and enhancing the Greenbelt. What role does the Greenbelt play in protecting local water and food security? It was established to protect land. Important to spend a few minutes talking about how the Greenbelt, or how has the Greenbelt, how could the Greenbelt going forward in the future protect local water and food security? Because you were there at ground zero with the creation of the Greenbelt. I'd love to hear your insights on this.
Sure, it was a really exciting time to be involved with that and very progressive thinking coming out of that. Building on progressive thinking from all political parties in Ontario, the Niagara Escarpment under the Davis regime, the Oak Ridges Moraine under the David Peterson and Bob Rae regimes, and ultimately put in place by the Mike Harris regime. So we've got nonpartisan support for protecting large areas. The McGuinty government says, let's make it bigger because sprawl is not stopping. And the key to the Greenbelt is to permanently protect the lands within it, be it farmland or natural areas, with some modest growth to support the rural centers, but not urbanization. That permanence is really important because outside of it, we see it being continually eroded. There was a review done of the Greenbelt from 2015 to 2017, and it concluded that the Greenbelt plan was working extremely well at protecting farmland of water quality in natural areas. In 2021, the Ford administration said they were going to grow the Greenbelt and make it the biggest expansion ever. They backed out on that and actually did the reverse, starting to remove land. This year, 2025, is the next 10-year review of the Greenbelt. It hasn't formally kicked off. There's been a bit of coverage in the media, but they're bound legislatively to do it. People and different groups have been advocating that it needs to be evidence-based, it needs to be very transparent, and it needs to have a whole ton of consultation with every group, sector, and First Nation, because it's that sort of democratic participatory effort that really gets society to buy into these things. So we should be demanding that when the government does start this review. Keep your eyes and ears peeled for any notion of that and chime in where and when you can. Go to meetings if there are in your regions. And that's where we are with the Greenbelt, and it's proven to work. And I think other areas warrant type of protections that it has offered. The 2 million acres that make it the biggest Greenbelt in the world, and something we should all be very proud of.
And there are probably some of you on this call who don't know much about the Greenbelt. A lot of the land that's protected is used for farming, and a lot of the land that's protected is actually pretty core to ensuring that we get clean water. On that, maybe I'll ask Sarah just to talk a bit about what role do you see the Greenbelt in protecting our local ecosystems and watersheds?
Absolutely. Thanks, Franz. As Victor started to speak to, the Greenbelt Plan explicitly recognizes that a healthy and well-connected system of natural areas is essential to providing the ecosystem services that we rely on for our food and water security and for a whole host of other benefits. It protects those areas accordingly. So natural areas in the Greenbelt are providing billions of dollars in those ecosystem services every year, including about $200 million per year in pollination services and another $159 billion per year in water filtration services, supporting provision of clean water to 7 million Ontarians. So it just speaks to that immense importance of protecting those areas permanently. And again, as Victor spoke to, as a key component of maintaining resilient food and water security. And luckily, the Greenbelt is an area where provincial protections for wetlands and other natural areas are relatively intact, with tighter restrictions on development. Zoning owners are not able to override those policies. But again, it's not immune to threat, as again, Victor spoke to already a little bit with the attempts to remove 3,000 hectares of land from the Greenbelt, a decision which was only overturned due to the extensive and sustained public backlash. Emphasizes the importance that we participate as individuals, municipalities, and organizations in the review process as an opportunity to express our thoughts on how the Greenbelt and protections of natural areas and farmland can be maintained, strengthened, or expanded to best support the communities we live in.
And Mark, I know because I was around when the Greenbelt was created, there were quite a few farmers who were not happy with the Greenbelt. And today, I'm perhaps representing it, but most of the farming organizations and farmers think the Greenbelt is an important tool in preserving farmland. I'm curious, what role do you see the Greenbelt playing in securing local food production and food security in general?
I have mixed thoughts with regard to the Greenbelt. What's good about it? It actually does what it's supposed to do in the place where it is. People recognize it. People know what it is. Our experience over the past couple of years is woe to anyone who threatens it. I would hope that would continue to be the case, although I'm not sure this government has the same views as before. They won a majority, and I'm scared that they will say, we won, we can do whatever we want. There are some issues with leapfrogging. Some municipalities took advantage of the Greenbelt designation to do things they shouldn't have done. The biggest change I would suggest that would make it better is to put it everywhere. Blanket the province with Greenbelt, require every municipality that's urban to draw a hard line around themselves, and everything else is protected. You want to grow, you grow up, you don't grow out. If this place we live in is not worth protecting, what is? For goodness sakes, there's 95% of the rest of the province to do something on. Go do it. But protect what is good. And that includes not only the farmland, but the landscape that has agriculture in it, which includes all of those good things that we want to protect, like water and species at risk and everything else that's green.
And Mark, that's a great segue to the next question I want to ask you. What can municipalities do to protect local food and water security? We've just had a provincial election. This government doesn't need to go to the polls again for another 4 years. We do have a Greenbelt review coming up, as Victor noted at the outset, but municipalities have some powers to protect farmland and natural areas. The question to each of you, we have quite a few municipal leaders on this webinar, including elected officials and municipal staff. What can municipalities do to protect local food and water security? Asking you to give very specific actions that municipalities can take. And Sarah, why don't I start off with you this time?
Yeah, sure. As you said, Franz, municipalities do hold a lot of influence over how their communities are structured in their role as planning authorities. With that power comes the opportunity and responsibility to protect the ecosystems and the farmland that provide for local food and water security. That role has become increasingly important as the provincial government does step back or has stepped back from its responsibilities. And Ontario Nature has published 2 reports in the past year that highlight diverse examples of how municipalities across Southern Ontario are protecting natural areas at the local level and how important that is in the current provincial context. Municipalities can protect natural areas from development using their official plan policies and zoning bylaws. And there's a really great example featured in both of those reports from the city of Guelph. Development is strictly prohibited in their natural heritage system, including the vast majority of wetlands, which goes above and beyond minimum provincial requirements and reduces the chances that those natural areas will be lost in the future. And in developing those reports, we worked with KBM Indigenous Professional Services to ensure the importance of restoring and respecting Indigenous governance, rights, and knowledge on the land is reflected. One of the municipalities we featured that's doing a good job is the County of Brant. Their official plan commits to upholding Indigenous constitutional, treaty, and UN recognized inherent rights. And they back that up with action-oriented policies. So policies that actually protect any natural areas Indigenous communities have identified as significant, and to returning natural areas to Indigenous ownership and stewardship where feasible and welcomed by the community. There's also examples around how municipalities can account for wetlands and other natural areas as natural assets and recognize the many services they provide and the economic value that comes with that, and ways they can support private wetland stewardship initiatives, including in an agricultural landscape with rural landowners. I'm happy to paste the links to both reports in the chat for anyone who is interested in learning a bit more. And again, just all really comes back to that foundational role that natural ecosystems play in ensuring reliable access to clean water and nutritious local food for everyone, in addition to all those other benefits that come with being surrounded and supported by those ecosystems.
Sarah, please put those links in the chat. That would be wonderful. Mark, I know that you have spent quite a bit of time engaged in municipal councils, both at a regional and lower tier level. What advice do you have for municipal leaders to protect local food and water security?
I probably would have had a different answer a year ago or 5 years ago. I'm from Waterloo. I worked in Waterloo for more than 30 years with the planning department. Our local Federation of Agriculture has. It's a unique place. I would suggest that it had the best planning department of anywhere in North America. We managed to do things that no one else could do. We managed to grow this wonderful, innovative, prosperous place that everybody wants to come to, and at the same time, protect farmland. I am incredibly disappointed that the province of Ontario did not recognize our planning regime as the template for the rest of the province. Instead, they destroyed it. And that's sad. I applaud Sarah for being so optimistic in terms of municipalities being able to plan and save things. I'm not as optimistic. I think that under the current regime, they can destroy anything they want. And there are no guardrails. And there need to be guardrails. And it needs to be public municipal planning. It needs to include the opinions of everyone who lives there. In other words, full and complete consultation. We have devolved our planning system to things like the Chamber of Commerce and other groups who have a very narrow focus. And it is absolutely not the environment, and it's absolutely not preserving farmland. It's to the exclusion of those things, even though what we do in agriculture is the biggest, if not the biggest, economic driver in this country. And that's sad.
In short, Mark, if I could paraphrase, is the municipal leaders who are on this call, make sure you are engaged in all the different stakeholders within your community in any discussions about land use planning. And Victor, perhaps I'll let you then you've spent so much time at the provincial level. We've talked about how the province is probably not listening, in too many instances going in the exact opposite direction required to secure our food and water systems. What can municipalities do given Bill 5 is a reality? There still must be things they can do. You could just end with a few examples.
Thanks, Franz. I'd say there's a number of things, but I'm going to pick just a couple. Even though the conservation authorities have been severely weakened, I would advocate ever so strongly that municipalities work with the conservation authorities, collaborate on watershed planning, including your neighboring municipalities that are in those watersheds. We need you to pick up the torch and carry forward because the province has abandoned and even constrained the ability to do it. Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment are basically shut down when it comes to that sort of thing. So we need you to do that. And it's in your own best interest as well as the broader interest. The Ford administration has systematically removed the authority of municipalities to control their own urban settlement boundaries. It's now a developer-led system where they can apply any time, and municipality can say no, but it goes to the planning tribunal and they have virtually no standing and can be awarded costs against them. Municipalities need to collaborate and start pushing back to the province saying this is unacceptable. Premier is not the mayor of every municipality in Ontario, and it's wrong what they've been doing, removing the roles of councillors and councils. I don't advocate that. You start pushing back harder through a joint effort with AMO.
It's 4:45. This has been a really hopeful and depressing discussion. It's depressing in the sense more difficult for municipalities to do the right thing, to take the actions required to protect our local food and water security. At the same time, there are specific actions that can be taken. Sarah mentioned some, Mark mentioned some, Victor mentioned some. And I think you should never underestimate how much power there is in speaking in one voice, just as Victor suggested. So with that in mind, I want to say thank you to all three speakers. And now I want to hand things over to those of you who call. If you have a question or a comment that you want panelists to respond to, just put it into the chat while people are thinking about that and entering questions into the chat. I know one question, I'm paraphrasing here, was when the Greenbelt review is happening, are they just looking at the Greenbelt Act, or are they reviewing a number of other pieces of land use planning legislation as part of the review? I think it's Victor, you're best to answer that.
I responded in the chat. It will include all three components of the Greenbelt: the Niagara Escarpment, Oak Ridges Moraine, and protected countryside. How far they delve into the moraine or escarpment plan policies, it's up to them.
Got a comment from Michael Powell. You develop fact-based regulations and policy from empirical natural sciences findings that include the Indigenous, civil, public, and private sectors. We've been talking about the issues of today since 1970 and before with little success. The new concept of hydro social cycle framework should be a focal point for all discussion. How does water ecology influence human mental well-being, and how do we impact water? This is a two-way street. This very closely follows Indigenous traditional teachings. Wendy Burton asks, any advice on dealing with communities that don't want to intensify? I know both Victor and Mark have some experience with that. Mark in Waterloo region, Victor probably higher level planning region. Any advice about how to get communities to deal with communities that don't want intensification?
Address that.
Sure.
Do it right, and do it with the authority of the people who live there. I think sometimes we look at increased densities in the wrong way. They are not all 30 or 50 story towers. Gentle density is something that can accommodate 2 or 3 times the current population of every urban area in Canada. And it could be done in a way that builds beautiful communities that people want to live in. And I'll use Waterloo, Waterloo region as an example. In our urban areas, 70% of all new homes are within the urban envelope. And if that wasn't working, people wouldn't want to come here, but they do. So there's proof that if you do it right, or at least attempt to do it right, people will come. And I would suggest that the only affordable to grow is within the urban envelope, because what is expensive is sprawl. Not necessarily today, but for every generation that comes afterward.
Victor, any thoughts on that?
Certainly, sprawl is expensive, and there's been dozens of studies, including in Canada and Ontario, showing that it just doesn't pay for itself. It's too spread out, and it doesn't pay for the life cycle costs of the infrastructure, building it, maintaining it, operating it, and replacing it. So there's that argument. But from a housing affordability perspective, too, gentle density and even mid-rise stuff is more affordable than building single detached houses for people seeking to get into home ownership. So that's another strong argument. And back to Waterloo, they've done some great research. They have thousands of units approved in suburban areas, but the market is not building out there because people want to be along the transit line and revitalizing downtowns and inner parts of these communities. It's giving older people the ability to age within their community, and younger people are now moving into those homes that they first had. So it's a benevolent circle.
With the Alliance for Livable Ontario, we published a report about a year ago about what you can do to get the right sort of density that Mark was talking about. If you visit fiveways.home.ca, you'll get access to the report and a whole bunch of communications, comms material that you can use to promote that.
Visualizing the different types of density is really effective for allaying people's concerns. With all the computer capabilities we have these days, it's an up and coming field to show neighborhoods what different types of intensification might look like.
Yeah.
Sorry, if I could just build on that now
Yes,
too.
please.
You
Yeah.
sparked on something. This is a big question with lots of answers. Just to say that in my own personal experience, I currently live in a gentle density neighborhood in Waterloo. I think it's an incredible location and an incredible opportunity to increase the number of people who get to live here and get to live a 30-minute walk from uptown Waterloo and a 10-minute drive from a beautiful St. Jacobs market. And it's just a wonderful opportunity. I'm in a low-rise apartment building. There's single detached housing here as well. It's close to a lot of the things that you want to be close to. Speaking from experience, I can give you that message to share as well.
Lots of questions coming in. We're going to do our best to get to as many of them as we can. Leslie Adams writes, how do we message to the country that you need to create a national infrastructure project for water through a natural infrastructure lens? The Prime Minister and the various premiers talking about the need for nation building projects. Leslie's suggesting a national infrastructure project for water. Anybody want to comment on that?
I'll comment on it, Franz, if I may. And that is, we treat water poorly because it's so abundant and so cheap. And if we were more careful with the water that we use, and we paid the appropriate price for it, we wouldn't need to look at giant mega projects to provide water. We could do very well with the water that we have in most places if we planned and planned well.
If I can maybe just build on what Mark said, to that point, I think really emphasizing what we need to do to support having that water continue to be clean and continue to be available and continue to be abundant. I work a lot in my role on wetland conservation and the many values of wetland conservation. And part of that is the immense value they have in filtering our water. There's a study that showed wetlands in Southern Ontario provide $4 billion in filtration services every year just from filtering phosphorus and sediments from our water, never mind any of the other filtration services that they provide for other kinds of materials that might be entering our waterways. So I think really helping build that awareness of the ecosystems that support that abundance of clean, fresh water that we are so lucky to have is an important part of highlighting why it's important and why we might want to consider protecting these areas a little bit better and having a better care for our ecosystems, aquatic and terrestrial.
Victor.
There was a question about poor soils in King Township. Most of King was included in the Greenbelt under the Oakers Moraine Plan, made up primarily of sands and gravel. So it's not the best farmland, although there's some great stuff along the slopes, north and south. That's the last place we want urbanization, because even though it isn't good farmland, it is the source of the headwaters of all the rivers flowing north and south across central Ontario. It is absolutely critical to protect our water quality, and that's why the Moraine Plan was first brought in. Even though it has a lot of farmland, it was about water protection. That would be my response to the King Township soils piece.
Yes, you.
Franz, because I'm familiar with soils, that's what I do. I find it difficult to deal with the argument that there's good soil and bad soil. I think soil grows food and it grows other things. Let's not discriminate too much on the basis of whether it's good or not, because when we do that, we justify getting rid of some of it. And I think when only 5% of this province has soil, you need to preserve it all, every square inch of it. And I would suggest too that some of the soil that people say is not as good is very good for things like pasture. It's a good place to locate livestock, barns especially. Instead of building a barn in the middle of a beautiful class 1 piece of farmland, build it somewhere else where the farmland isn't quite as good. It's still agriculture. It's still a good use of the land. Let's treat agricultural land with respect. In this time when there's this big focus on critical minerals, I think we need to look at soil very carefully and consider it to be an amalgamation of critical minerals along with organic matter. It's something that needs to be saved. Once you pave it over, it's gone and you can't make it very well. Save what is good and plan so that you can save it.
It's a really interesting perspective, Mark. We often think of soil as we just take it for granted, much like Sarah was saying, we take a lot of other ecosystem services for granted. The destruction of it, terrible. We're just coming up to 5 o'clock, so I've got one more question. Thank you to all of you who have put questions in the chat. I'll speak in a moment how you can reach out to the panelists afterwards if you want to get answers to questions that we couldn't get to. Paul writes, okay, so Ford has a majority and feels empowered to enact his questionable agenda. On the other hand, I see strong public opposition. Will public opinion be enough to stop Ford's plans? And that's a great question. Each of you can perhaps give a response, given your history, your perspectives, and your various levels of hope. Maybe I'll start with you, Sarah. What do you public opposition be enough to stop its plans?
Optimistically, in the way that I am and try to be, say yes, but that it needs to be as strong and as sustained as it was when we experienced the attack on the Greenbelt back in 2022. I think that's a really good case study that shows public opinion does matter and can change the actions of the provincial government. So I would say yes, recognizing that it won't be easy and that we need to come together and be strong and consistent about what we want to see and what we don't want to see.
Yeah. Victor, Do you think public opinion will be enough to stop Ford's plans?
It hasn't been yet, but I'm always hopeful, and that's the only thing that's actually ever changed anything. So, of course, it will.
Okay. And Mark?
Public opinion isn't good enough. You have governance change with a vote. And I think you have to take that seriously. The most votes win. And when you consider changing government, you need a credible alternative. There has to be someone who you can believe in and who is credible enough that when they are elected, if they are elected, they will do what they say they're going to do.
On that note, I will take the liberty as moderator to put my 2 cents worth on the question. I think public opinion can, in fact, stop Ford. It's clear, given how he backtracked on the Greenbelt land grab, that he does listen to the public, or specifically, he listened to his MPPs who were telling him in ever more anxious ways, you have to reverse this. The question is, how do we get public opinion to actually get to the point where Ford has no choice but to undo those policies that are undermining food and water protections, the systems for food and water protection? We work at a local basis, and municipalities can play a key role in that by coming up with policies that make sense for protecting our local food and water systems. We build public support by modeling the behavior we want, by showing this is how we want it done. Municipalities have the opportunity to do that. With that, I want to say thank you very much to Mark, Victor, and Sarah for this very informative hour. I want to thank all of you who have joined for your comments and questions. I know we haven't been able to get to all of the questions, so if you have some for the panelists, please send them to me. I'll put my email in chat so you can reach me, and we'll forward them to the appropriate person. We will be making this recording available in the coming days. I'll send a video link to everyone who has registered. As we discussed earlier, the Greenbelt is an important tool to help protect our water and food security at both the local and provincial levels. In a matter of weeks, the Ontario Greenbelt Alliance will be releasing Greenbelt Toolkit designed for municipal leaders. It's going to have relevant information about how the Greenbelt can be supported by your municipality. It's going to have key facts about the Greenbelt, a sample resolution, and talking points to share with your constituents and local media. And it will also contain links to informative webinars that will help deepen your understanding of the Greenbelt and how it can support municipal goals. When it's ready, I'll notify everyone who registered for this webinar. I think the last point I want to leave you with is that there is hope. We have a lot of solutions. We have a lot of solutions that are tried and tested. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to take the good ideas that have been implemented in many instances here in Ontario already and build public pressure for municipalities, a province, and ultimately the federal government to implement them. So I hope you have hope, because you should, because all of the signs are there. All of the ingredients for securing our local food and water systems are there. It's now a question of us putting our nose to the grindstone, as it were. So finally, I just want to say a big thanks to EcoSpark for partnering with us, and a very big thank you to Sarah, Victor, and Mark, and a big thanks to all of you for joining us today as we talk about how we can build a stronger community. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day and weekend. Take care. Thanks.